Hi parents, this is our Hurricane Section 2 Lesson 2. This ended up taking 2 days because we did stop. It started on Thursday. We did stop and complete our social contracts, but this is what we did. And it ended yesterday, and I have to say, I think this is probably one of the best lessons we've had in class so far. Just as far as how things went smoothly with students staying on task and understanding what we were doing. So we started off with our bell ringer. Students were given two sentence fragments. They were given was over 400 miles wide and flood walls on top of levees. And they had to complete those fragments. They had 5 minutes to complete them. Then they were given the option to read a book while they were waiting if they finished before the 5 minutes were up. And then we did a review and I gave them two mentor sentences. So Hurricane Katrina was over 400 miles wide. And then flood walls on top of levees. And they struggled with this one, even though we went over vocabulary words a few times. Flood walls and levees they were like, what's a flood wall? What's a flood wall? So I intentionally did not give them the information. I said they just needed to do the best they could because I did have a plan for this. So they finished their sentences and then we moved on. I give them 2 minutes to take out their agenda, write their homework, and put their agenda away. Writing in your agenda is mandatory every day, but we don't have a lot of time for it. So it's just something that you just get it out, you write it down, and you put it away. This this is where we kind of stopped for the day and went to our social contract. So this is where we picked up on Friday. I had a student read our objectives for the day. I can explain how and why Hurricane Katrina impacted New Orleans in such a devastating way, and I really liked that they knew what devastating meant. I can use photographs with captions, graphs, tables, and maps to help me understand the text. I have the students read the objectives because this is them taking responsibility and ownership for their learning. So they know that by the end of the class period, their goal is to be able to do these two things. Today we will read more from our book, Hurricane Katrina, a true book, so that we can have a better understanding of what happened in New Orleans and just how bad the damage to the city was. And then we will practice gathering information from these sources. I try and tie back and explain to them why we need to do this. How is this going to help us in the future? Why do we even do this? This was our social contract. We started off with two ripples from the previous lesson that we didn't get to, and then they turned their assignment in. So what roles did the levees play in protecting the city of New Orleans, and what would have happened differently if the levees would have done their job? Students then opened their book, Hurricane Katrina, to pages 17 and 18, and they were able to look at pictures of levees and flood walls. And they could see where the levees were broken and how the water where it was supposed to be held had flooded into the city. They could see where the water was supposed to be and where the water ended up being flooded. So even though when we were just talking about levees and flood walls, they could tell you what a levee and a flood wall was by definition, they could not connect it to something physically. And so we talked about how, wow, now that we've actually looked at pictures of levees and flood walls, we can connect that to the text, what we're reading. The next question was, and this one was really interesting, and because they had to really think about this. This is considered a higher order thinking question. What would have happened differently if the levees would have done their job? And all of the students understood the assignment. They all understood that if the levees would have held, that New Orleans would not have flooded. So I was very proud of them. They turned their lesson in, and so we moved on to a little segment called If It Isn't, the Consequences of Our Own Behavior. So we're using our social contract to hold us accountable and say what the rules are in our classroom. So if the students are acting in a way that um, is in opposition to their social contract, they will get a warning. I have a clipboard with the little small, the small sticky notes on it that say, "I notice you're doing something that's disruptive. Please stop." I don't want to keep walking around saying, "Stop talking, stop doing this." I wanted to find a non-verbal cue for them because everybody needs to be reminded, right? Get back on track, stop playing around, we've got work to do. And I know that when students are verbally called out, sometimes it's embarrassing. Even though their behavior is in front of all the other students, they don't want to be corrected for that behavior in front of all the other students. And because my lessons are so packed into the time that I have, I really don't have the opportunity to pull individual students aside and talk to them about their behavior and why are you doing this and why are you talking when I'm talking and why are you being silly and interrupting the learning of the person next to you. So I'm using these stickers and it worked so well because it is a physical reminder that they can see on their desk. Ooh, I already have a sticker on my desk. I have a sticky note on my desk. I need to get it together. The second time, and I don't mean just little things. I mean, but the second time they interrupt learning, right? The second time they break their social contract, they have silent lunch. It's a reminder, it's a time for reflection. So they will get their lunch and they will sit at a table separate from their peers and eat lunch. They do get to play normally at recess. I don't take their recess from them, but they have a little bit of time to reflect. If I have to talk to them a third time, it's an infraction. It goes in the it goes into the PBIS system. Coach Shaw is notified, not just through the system, that there was a minor infraction. Um, and I will give you a call and let you know that I've had some problems that I can't deal with it at school. Like that my conversations that I've had with them, the consequence that I've given them hasn't been enough. And so they now have a consequence in the book. The fourth time I have to talk to them about these behaviors, I'm going to move them to my teacher table at the front of the room for probably about a week. And they will not be working with teams. They will have to do their work independently. And then we're going to talk about things. And they're going to sign a contract that they're going to follow the rules and they're going to move back to their spot. If it moves on to the fifth time, then we're going to have a parent-teacher conference. I will give you a call. Once we get to 3, 4, and 5, you and I will be in communication. It is not going to be like, it's not going to get to 5 and you're going to be like, I didn't know that they've been having issues in class or that they had to be moved to the teacher table. You will know all of those things. So, for silent lunch, they have to put their name on the check yourself list. If they're with me after lunch, their silent lunch will be the next day. If they're with me before lunch, they will serve silent lunch that day. And lunch period is only about 15 minutes long. So it should really is just the opportunity to think about how they want to act. So back on track. The first thing that we did was I gave them on the board these two sets of sentences and they had to decide if it was a fragment or a sentence. And I explained to them that a fragment is like, think about like when you break a glass, it breaks into fragments. If you break a sentence into pieces, it's fragments. It's a fragment. So we read, the storm surge crushed the coast. The students had to identify the subject, and the subject is the storm surge, right? So I circled that on the board. And then what was the predicate? Crushed the coast. So is this a sentence? Even though it doesn't have a capital letter and a period, if it had those things, would it be a sentence? Yes. So we capitalize the T and we put a P and put a period after coast. The next one was neighborhoods in New Orleans. Is this a fragment or a subject? Where is the subject? Well, the subject is the entire thing, neighborhoods in New Orleans. So is this a fragment or a sentence? It's a fragment. So we have to capitalize neighborhoods. We have to capitalize new. We have to capitalize Orleans because it's the beginning of a sentence and a proper noun. Now we need to add a predicate to it. Most of my classes said were flooded during the hurricane, something to that effect. So we added our predicate and we put a period. I understand that the students are struggling. They really struggle with this. I remember being in elementary school and struggling with grammar, so I understand. We will go over this all year long, and by the end of the year, they should know it. They should understand. Okay, so time to read. I really wanted them to have the opportunity to read to each other, but because of time, I allowed them to read some of it and I read some of it just so that we could get through, because I realized that even though we were just reading a few pages, we read pages 15 to 19, and there's really only like a half a page worth of text in large font on each page, that it takes them a little while. So we did that, and then we talked about making big sentences from kernels. So I provided them with a kernel right here, right? So I likened it to when you make popcorn. So you start off with a tiny little kernel, and you need to make big buttery popcorn, right? So we took our tiny little kernel. We asked ourselves two questions. We asked when and where, and we ended up making a nice big buttery sentence. So we need to learn how to take information we read and expand it into meaningful writing. Their example was hurricanes occur. When do hurricanes occur? Well, they occur when there's no land to slow them down. Where do they occur? Over warm water. So we took that information and we created this really nice sentence. Hurricanes occur over warm water when there is no land to slow them down. We did this one together on the board. Towns were destroyed. We had to talk about the difference between a city/town and a state. And that when we talk about a city or a state, we talk about the city, we say the city first, then the state. So students were confused that Miami was not a state. They were confused that New Orleans wasn't a state. They were confused that Mobile wasn't a state. So we did spend a little time of talking about that. So towns were destroyed in Florida. Towns were destroyed in Louisiana. Towns were destroyed in Mississippi and Alabama. So where were they destroyed? We listed the states. Why were they destroyed? Hurricane Katrina created large amounts of flooding, right? So towns were destroyed in Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama because Hurricane Katrina created large amounts of flooding. So we took that tiny little kernel, towns were destroyed. We asked ourselves where and why, and we turned it into a really nice sentence. On their paper, they did this one. So I did help them. My general education classes, I did write the when and why, right? We talked about it. I wrote it on the board, and then they could take that and create their sentence. I did tell them they had to use the information in the kernel. They cannot just tell me the when and why. They needed to tell me that New Orleans citizens were stranded, right? And they had some really good sentences. The one thing that I'm noticing is they struggle with spelling, but I'm working on finding ways to fun ways to increase their spelling ability. So then they did not just specifically read, but they had their books open and they were referring back to their books while they were answering these two ripple questions. So The first one was, what did the people and the city of New Orleans experience when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans? So I read the question. They thought to themselves. They used the book to help them write down their ideas. They shared it in a safe space with their partner. And then I use our PBIS to pull up random people, and a couple of people shared with the class. The second one, we ran out of time in every single class for this last question, but it's okay because they were phenomenal. They did amazing. What factors contributed to the devastation? So I will allow them to do this question on Monday before we move into the next lesson. So that will be lesson 3. But they're doing wonderful, and I'm really proud of them. I've seen a lot of improvement since the beginning of the year. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I have sent some emails with my remind information. I do try and send a couple of reminds. I really don't want to overwhelm you with the reminds. I know some parents have remind block. They don't want the text, and that's fine. But I do try and send out a couple pieces of communication. Students have homework every day. I am collecting homework on Monday instead of yesterday for this last week. I have a lot of grading to do, so I just left their homework in their take-home folder, and I will collect it on Monday. So I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will see everybody on Monday.